Before we begin, we are a small channel on the path to 1,000 subscribers. If this kind of content interests you, subscribe now. It takes 1 second and makes a real difference. Now, let's go. Close your eyes. You are holding a document that has not been read the way we are about to read it. Not in 400 years. Not like this. The year is 1589. The region, the Rhineland. Between Cologne and Bedburg, where the fields lie flat and the morning fog settles over the earth like something placed there deliberately. Something that does not intend to leave. The place. A village whose inhabitants bolt their doors at night. Not against thieves. Against something they cannot name. And at the center of that fear, a man. Not a stranger. A neighbor. Forget what you imagined. It was not a creature that came out of darkness. It came from the inside of the community itself, slowly, without sound, the way water moves through stone. He is not a hero. He is not a victim. He is the figure a medieval film needs in order to become truly uncomfortable. Someone everyone knew, someone many trusted, and whom no one recognized in time. What do you smell? Wet soil after rain. What do you hear? The silence between two testimonies in a courtroom. What do you feel? The cold of a stone wall against your back, because your legs have stopped holding you. Today, we go in. Before we go further, let me show you how we know this. The primary source is a broadsheet printed in Cologne in 1590, one of the earliest mass-produced documents about a criminal trial in history. It contains the official indictment, the confessions extracted under torture, and a detailed description of the public execution. Historian Rolf Schulte, in his work on werewolf trials in early modern Germany, analyzed the Stumpp case within the broader context of witch persecution. Legal historian Charlotte Rose Miller has examined how these trials did not arise from collective madness, but from precise social mechanisms, debts, inheritance disputes, family conflicts. This is not myth, it is record. Back to the Rhineland. Imagine you are writing a screenplay, medieval Europe, or more precisely, early modern Germany, that century in which the Reformation had shattered the old certainties and left in their place not new ones, but an open wound. You need an antagonist, not a tyrant on a throne who issues commands and sends armies, not a foreign invader with an unreadable face. You need someone who belongs to the village, someone whose presence surprises no one, someone whose absence would be noticed. Peter Stumpp belongs to the village. He owns land. He has children. He is seen at the market. He sits through the Sunday sermon. He knows the names of his neighbors' horses. He is not loud. He is not strange. He is not the one people point to when they speak about danger. And that is the first reason he works as a cinematic antagonist with such unsettling precision. Evil that comes from within does not wear a face that is easy to read. In the film, the first scene would not be dramatic. He walks a dirt path. The morning is gray. The dew still sits on the grass. He nods at someone. That person nods back. Cut. And the viewer, who already knows the story, holds their breath, not because of what they saw, but because of what they cannot see. That is the first lesson Stumpp teaches a filmmaker. Fear does not come from showing. Fear comes from withholding. From the moment the familiar tilts, and you cannot tell when it began to tilt. The Rhineland of the late 16th century smells of wood smoke and wet leather. The roads between villages are narrow, churned by hooves, and on damp days every step sinks. The houses are low, the ceilings lower. Most people do not sleep alone, not out of tenderness, but out of cold. The nights are long. The fire burns until the wood runs out. And when it runs out, you sit in a darkness no city today still knows. Absolute, soundless, with no source of light anywhere. In that darkness, something thrives. Not the supernatural, the rumor. The rumor is the antagonist's true instrument, not the act. The act can be disproven, not the intention. The intention is invisible. The rumor exists between those two things. It has no shape, so you cannot hold it. It has no source, so you cannot refute it. It moves like smoke through the narrow lanes of a village, and by the time it arrives, it is already larger than what it was when it began. Peter Stumpp was not a rumor. But the Peter Stumpp of the trial, the Peter Stumpp described in the 1590 broadsheet, is built almost entirely from rumor. And that is what makes him so valuable to cinema. The broadsheet reads like a document written to make the unthinkable feel credible. Stumpp was accused of committing murders over the span of decades. Children, adults, members of his own family. The confession, given under torture on the rack, contained details that seemed plausible to the prosecutors because they confirmed the structure of the devil's pact the court had already assumed. That is not a footnote. That is the center of everything. Here is the dramatic gold for a filmmaker. The confession is not truth. It is the shape truth had to take in order to be accepted. Stumpp did not say what he had done. He said what the court already knew, and what the court already knew was what theology dictated a man must say when he had made a pact with the devil. A good antagonist does not simply lie. He says what is expected of him, and in doing so, he becomes a mirror of the system that interrogates him. Look closely. The indictment contains no independent witnesses. It contains neighbors who suddenly had memories. Memories that aligned with what the judge already wanted to know. This is not an exception in the history of witch trials. It is the rule. Step back. What is a werewolf in the late Middle Ages and early modern period, actually? Not a literary creature, not folklore, a legal category. The werewolf accusation functioned in this era as a juridical mechanism for the transfer of guilt. A human being who had made a pact with the devil could step outside himself, not only physically, but morally. He was no longer accountable for what he did, because he had surrendered himself to evil. And that also meant the community was no longer accountable for what it did to him. The devil's pact relieved both sides of responsibility, the accused and the accusers. For a film, this means Peter Stumpp is not interesting because he is a monster. He is interesting because his trial reveals how a community turns someone into a monster, and what that process says about the community itself. The fear that moves through the village is not fear of an animal. It is fear of the unrecognized. Fear of the familiar revealed as strange. Fear of the possibility that the man who nodded at you this morning is not who you believed him to be. Imagine the scene. A child disappears. The village gathers. Faces are hard. Voices are low. And somewhere in that gathering stands Peter Stumpp, searching with the others. He helps. He suggests directions. He expresses concern, and perhaps he is the one who asks, loudest of all, who did this? That is the moment a good director does not explain. He lets it stand. He leaves the viewer alone with the discomfort. This is where the true strength of a Stumpp figure in modern cinema lies. A bad film would show him running through the forest. Blood, transformation, special effects that bend the body and make the audience shudder. That is spectacle. Spectacle is cheap. A good film would show his neighbor deciding to testify against him. That is the scene that breaks something. Not the transformation, but the hesitation before the scribe. The hand that trembles. The brief pause in which everything is still possible. And then the moment the name is spoken. Clearly, aloud. Without return, because that moment, that single silent moment, costs a life. And the person testifying knows it, and does it anyway. Why? That is the question a screenplay about Stumpp would have to answer. Not, what did he do? But, what brought his neighbor to speak against him? Was it guilt? Was it fear? Was it an old account that could finally be settled, under the cover of justice? The history of witch trials is full of such accounts. Inheritance disputes that suddenly assumed religious dimensions. Neighborhood conflicts that transformed into accusations of sorcery. Families who denounced one another because it was the only way to save themselves. That is not speculation. It is documented. It is human. When Peter Stumpp later became a symbol of medieval evil, when his name lived on in chronicles, in broadsheets, in English translations that circulated for decades after his execution, it was not because of his acts. It was because of the structure that made his conviction possible. A structure built from social tension, religious pressure, economic conflict, and a justice system that knew its verdict before it asked its questions. This is not a special case. It is a pattern. and a pattern that can be recognized if you are willing to look. The broadsheet describes the execution with clinical precision. Stumpp was tortured, his limbs broken with heated iron, his body displayed on the wheel. Beside him, his daughter and his companion, condemned as accomplices, not for their own acts, for their connection to him. Because guilt in this era was transferable, through blood, through proximity, through the simple fact of having been near. Imagine the square. It is autumn. The sky is white. The crowd stands dense, shoulder to shoulder, and the smell of smoke mixes with earth and wet cloth. Children are lifted so they can see better. Someone is selling bread. The sounds of wood and metal carry far, and somewhere at the edge of the crowd stands a child who does not understand what it is seeing, but who reads the face of the mother standing beside it, and understands that one does not cry here, that one watches, that the watching itself is a form of participation. That is the final cut, not on Stumpp, on the child, because that child will be an adult in 20 years, and this scene will remain in its body as knowledge of what guilt looks like, how guilt is assigned, how guilt can be celebrated when it takes the right shape. Step back. Look at everything we have seen. A man who belongs to the community. A trial that requires no evidence because it produces confessions. A crowd that requires no truth because it requires an explanation. Neighbors who testify. A daughter condemned alongside him. A child learning how to watch. And a system that runs smoothly, not despite its injustice, but because its injustice is useful to everyone involved. Peter Stumpp is the perfect antagonist, not because he is evil. He is the perfect antagonist because he does not carry evil alone. Every person in that village who testified, who stayed silent, who agreed, who looked away, who bought bread while the wheel turned, they are all part of this figure. That makes him infinitely harder to condemn than a dragon or a tyrant. You cannot kill him with a sword. You cannot banish him with a law. You can only recognize him in the structures that created him, in the moments when someone decides to speak a name. And that is the true function of a good antagonist in cinema. Not to frighten, to make you recognize. The theater goes dark, the credits roll, and the question remains in the air, not spoken, not formed into words, but felt like cold. Who would I have been in that village? Not the hero, not the monster, the neighbor. If this video showed you why history is not only the past, why it still speaks to us today about guilt, fear, and the quiet machinery of social persecution, then help us reach more people. We are a small channel on the path to 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription counts. Click subscribe now. It takes only a second. And before you go, leave a comment. What surprised you most? The legal function of the werewolf accusation? The role of the neighbors in the trial? Or the final image, the child at the edge of the crowd? Write it in the comments. It takes only 15 seconds and helps this video reach more people. Thank you for staying until the end. Until next time.